At Medical Mag claimed that just one alcoholic drink a day, just one, shortened your life. Now, when I looked at the cumulative size of this show's Blue Nun bar bills, there was only one inescapable conclusion. The whole This Week team died 5 years ago. It's probably why the schedulers put us on so late, a suitable time for a show produced and presented by the living dead. I don't see our consumption subsiding, however. Events are conspiring to drive us even more to drink. This week, Donald Trump launched a missile attack on Syria, then declared he would bring peace to the Korean peninsula. What could possibly go wrong with that? Barman, just pass the bottle. In Britain, Jewish Labour MPs revealed a sickening catalogue of vile anti-Semitic abuse, nearly all of it, they thought, from left-wing supporters of their own party. At one stage, I had to pinch myself that I was watching the House of Commons in 2018 and not the Reichstag in 1932. And it's still not clear what the Labour leadership is going to do about this spreading stain on our national life. Barman, I'll have the same again, thanks. Then, just when you think British politics can't get any more depressing, along comes revelations of our treatment of the Windrush generation, a scandal so contemptible that it doesn't just demean the government that presided over it, but shames all of us who've allowed it to happen. It suddenly dawns on you that our country is letting in ISIS beheaders and torturers and enslavers to return to live among us because the going's got a bit tough for the poor dears in Syria. But it's prepared to contemplate the deportation of Caribbean grannies who've lived and worked here all their adult lives. Barman, just leave me the keys. I'm going to let myself out. Speaking of those who should have been deported from civilised public discourse years ago, I'm joined on the sofa tonight by two politicians who forced many of you to seek solace in the bottle. I speak, of course, of hashtag sad man on the left, Alice Johnson, and her debut, as we say in France, debut appearance on This Week, pretty hashtag the only way is Essex, Patel. Welcome to you both.
Good evening.
Pretty, your moment of the week.
Diaspora. It's been the week of the Commonwealth, but I was with the Indian diaspora yesterday and the leader of India, Prime Minister Modi.
The Prime Minister is here.
Prime Minister of India is in town, and I attended an event that the Indian community had put on for him, which was incredible. And it was incredible to see British Indians celebrating an Indian Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, but demonstrating the sort of shared values that we have between our two cultures.
And is the Indian Prime Minister feeling well inclined to Britain?
Well, I thought he was on outstanding form yesterday, spoke very highly of our country, but also he spoke really highly of the strong relationship and the bond between our two countries, but also the people of the United Kingdom and the Indian.
India.
Yeah.
OK. Alan?
Well, I thought it was quite significant that at last some kind of talks are going on between North Korea and America. You referred to it. Trump has sent a very important head of CIA over there to have a kind of preliminary
Secretary of State.
Yeah. I wouldn't hold your breath, though, because for Kim Il-jong, he'll be thinking now, who was the last dictator who gave up their nuclear capability and what happened to them? And it was, of course, Gaddafi.
Indeed.
In Libya. And what happened there actually is a example of what Kim Il-jong is saying that he needs his nuclear weapons for.
Oh, yeah.
So
I fear it might be more difficult than the White House or Mr. Trump is making it out, but we shall see.
We shall see.
Now, the killing fields of Syria have claimed 500,000 lives over the past 7 years, displaced millions and turned millions more into refugees. But amidst the relentless carnage, about which they've managed to do nothing, Western leaders still retain a special revulsion for the use of chemical weapons. So when pictures appeared of civilians, including many children, suffering and dying from a chemical attack in a rebel-held suburb of Damascus, his atrocity wildly placed at the door of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, the consensus among leaders in Washington, London and Paris was that a military response was essential. So over 100 cruise missiles were launched by the US, the UK and France on Syrian chemical weapons facilities, a retaliation which did enjoy the backing of all their major allies. But journalist and author Peter Hitchens begs to differ. This is his take of the week.
We all know the old cliche that truth is the first casualty of war. But how often do we recognize that we are ourselves to blame for this? In normal times, wise people doubt the words of governments and suspect propaganda, but when the jet engines begin to roar, they believe atrocity stories. They demand that we must go out and bomb somebody. Anyone with any doubt is denounced as a wicked apologist for the undoubted monster Assad and must hang his head in shame. What we seem to forget is that Assad's opponents and would-be replacements are blood-stained jihadis who we would arrest if we found them in Birmingham. We somehow managed to forget that our overthrow of the monsters Saddam in Iraq and Gaddafi in Libya led directly to the migration crisis, now convulsing Europe. And we put out of our minds the likelihood that more intervention in Syria will prolong that war, not end it. I have absolutely no idea what happened in Douma near Damascus on the 7th of April. Most of the reports I've read or seen were prepared by people at least 70 miles away from uncheckable, unidentified sources. And because I tediously take the trouble to read the reports of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, such as this one, I know how hard it is to attribute blame in such cases. And I'm still waiting for a justification for the use of force.
Thanks to the Hill Garden and Pergola in Hampstead. Welcome, Peter Hitchens, back to the programme. So Peter says he's still waiting for a reason for the justification of the use of force, Priti Patel. What is it?
I think it's the humanitarian basis in terms of what we've seen. Children and families being gassed, and it's not the first time we've seen this happen on successive occasions over the last few years. And I thought, Peter, I have to say, your view was very compelling when you spoke about the number of people that have been displaced and everything else. But the reality is, this attack was very much about depleting the chemical weapon supplies, not attacking the country, people, or talking about regime change.
Peter Hitchens.
Well, it's an alleged attack. We don't actually know what took place. And the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has only just begun its inquiries. And we constantly, well, I think they're there now, but that's a complicated question, which let's not go into now. But what I can tell you is that I looked in great detail into the Khan Sheikhoun episode a year ago, where most people maintain that there was an attack and that it was conducted by the Assad government. In fact, if you look at the report, it's full of doubts. The OPCW never went, their fact-finding team never went to Khan Sheikhoun. There is no reliable custody chain. The report itself and the Joint Investigative Mechanism report, which followed it, are full of weird contradictions, strange, inappropriate medical treatments, samples that don't add up, no custody chain. I simply think that on the basis...
Are you in any doubt that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons?
I don't know. I think on the areas that I've actually looked at, it seems to me that hard evidence is lacking. And you have to.
Hold on. You say hard evidence.
A very simple point here.
There have been 85 documented chemical attacks since 2011. 85.
Yes.
So who's behind them?
Have you looked at these documents yourself?
Yes, I have.
Well, what do you find when you look at them? Do you find conclusive?
So the Human Rights Watch group, backed up by 7 independent sources of corroboration, is just making it up.
I didn't say that. You can say that if you want to. I said nothing of the kind. What I'm saying is much as Alan's former government colleague, Admiral Lord West, said. It's very odd that President Assad should behave in this way, given it's the one guaranteed way of getting the United States to take the side of the rebels against him. And it doesn't add the same argument is made by Peter Ford, Her Britannic Majesty's former ambassador to Syria, who knows Assad and has lived in the place. He can't understand why this would be an intelligent thing for him to do. And Assad may be very bad, but
Alan Johnson.
But I'm
mad.
assuming, Peter,
Yes.
that if there was a chemical weapons attack, and if that chemical weapons attack came from the Assad regime, that you would be supporting what's happening. The problem with the film is...
Well, let's find out if that's true.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily... I don't think that it's a particularly powerful moral response to the killing of innocent civilians to hurl high explosive into a densely populated area. No, I wouldn't necessarily support
But that's not
the
what they
action
did.
chosen.
Not,
I would.
that's
I would.
exactly
Well,
what
it's
didn't
it's what most people thought we would do, and if we didn't do it, it was because there was a sudden.
Well, let's leave aside what most people thought we would do.
Leave that aside.
It's
You
not-
weren't-
yeah, but
you
Johnson
weren't
back.
even asked as members of Parliament whether we should do
Well,
it or
that's
not.
a separate issue.
a different-
Well, it isn't a separate issue.
Related issue, but
It's a
separate.
rush- the rush
is
to
this.
judgment,
The point
a
is this.
rush
to judgment.
Your film starts on a false premise that the British public actually want to see the Bond. Actually, you probably speak for the British public on this. In fact, all the polling I've shown it was very sceptical about any attack.
Well, I wasn't referring to the British public, actually.
And as for the chemical weapons inspectors, as you know, they cannot apportion blame. All they can do is to say whether there's been a chemical weapons attack. The reason they can't apportion blame is that last year Russia blocked that as an addition to their remit. So we won't get them telling us who did it.
Can I just point
but
out
it
that
seems to me, hold on,
that
Peter,
that's
it
not
seems
quite
to me
true.
from everything I've heard, and yes, I wasn't there. You're getting it from aid workers. You're getting it from all the people who you kind of trust on these things, the NGOs, etc. Is that there was a chemical attack. Helicopters were used. None of the various groups, and I agree with you about not seeking regime change, by the way. I agree with that bit of your argument. But none of these groups possess any helicopters. And one thing's for sure, everyone living in that area around Douma says there were helicopters all over the place.
Well, a helicopter wouldn't be conclusive in anything. Helicopters can drop all kinds of things or not drop anything at all. It wouldn't. The fact is that, and I wasn't referring to the British public actually in my criticism. I was referring to the almost unanimous collapse of the media and of the world of politics into acceptance of something which they had no real proof of. And I've been astonished by it. This is a country which made a huge mess of Iraq, which made an immense mess of Libya, in which intelligent people have for long years known about the disaster of Suez and the lies told over that, and the Gulf of Tonkin, and there's so many instances. And yet suddenly all of the newspapers and the politicians who might once have been relied upon to say, hang on, could we not just wait a minute? Isn't this just a little bit too convenient? Couldn't we just wait for the proof? Didn't say a thing and joined in a kind of compassionate
proof, you wouldn't support it.
I said I wouldn't support the action
what does
proposed.
it matter?
I said I wouldn't support the action proposed. It matters because, of course, you take action against the use of chemical weapons.
So what would you do?
No, I haven't finished my point. You've interrupted me before I finished. What you got was this kind of rush into a sort of compassionate jingoism, where everybody was saying, "Well, I'm so compassionate, I want to bomb Syria." I don't know what I'd do. I'm not. For a start, I mean, my general view is that you take the evidence first, the verdict second, and the sentence last. You're asking me to come up with a sentence before there's even been evidence.
Priti Patel, what? Well, you don't think there's been evidence. That's another matter.
No, it isn't. It's not that I don't think there's been evidence.
No, you don't think there's evidence.
The OPCW, the only body...
They haven't been there yet.
Exactly, so there is no... And yet...
Because the Russians kept them out.
No, it's not because the Russians kept them out. They have not... It was nothing to do with the Russians keeping them out. The British government and the American government and the French government acted last week before there was any attempt to find out what had actually happened. Any attempt at all.
Yeah.
Patel,
No,
I'm still trying to work... What is
Straight
the
in.
consequence of that attack, though? So we hit 3 different sites, which we think were chemical weapons storage areas. The Assad regime, within 24 hours, was back attacking the rebels. What's actually been achieved?
Well, I think, if I can just come back to some of Peter's points,
Well,
and Andrew, I will.
Quite
look,
nice to get an answer to that question, because it's important.
The point is that, you know, this was to deplete the chemical weapons supplies, a targeted attack, because we have seen, to Peter's point, successive use and repeated use of chemical warfare on the Syrian people, on children and families. And this isn't a new phenomenon at all. This is a conflict that's been going on for 8 years.
But we haven't
We've seen
destroyed
this
his whole capability, have we?
Well, not the total capability, no.
To do it? No.
No, and that
So he could do it again?
That could be a possibility, but of course it was about the signal, the message that this would send out by having this particular attack, that we would not sit back and just sort of, accept more repeated and sustained attacks on Syrian civilians. And I think it's worth pointing out as well that we do live in a world where there are international norms, where there's a rules-based system. Collectively the world said no to the use of chemical weapons a hell of a long time ago.
Can I ask
and
you a question?
surely we should be actually trying to uphold those rules and values at the same time.
Can I ask you a question? Do you know the name of the organisation which was in control of Duma at the time of the alleged attack?
No, I don't.
Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam. Do you know that in 2016 Jaish al-Islam was accused of using chemical weapons against Kurds in Aleppo, and accused quite strongly? And I'm not saying that it's not proven. It's no more proven than the other event. But it seems to me this rush to judgment is taking place. People are rushing.
It's not a rush to judgment. We've seen this happen successively, Peter.
The most basic facts about the situation
Well,
on
of course,
the ground.
the rebels
where
in
it happened
Duma,
are rushing to judgment.
After the chemical attack, the rebels in Duma immediately surrendered and were put on the surrender buses. So it's kind of unlikely it would have been them. But you've speculated.
You say it's unlikely.
Well, I've said
but on
that,
what
yeah.
basis? But
then, because they surrendered.
They surrendered because his chemical weapons
They were on
worked.
the point of surrender anyway.
Unfortunately.
Well, that's
the argument was about the handover of the heavy weapons.
Just to get where you're coming from. You said you don't want to speculate. You don't know. But you've speculated that Western countries can fake such attacks.
I haven't said anything of the kind.
Yes, you did. You said, speaking of Britain, in your blog, speaking of Britain, France and America, you could say there might be a temptation to fake such attacks. If these major nations, talking about us, America and France, will act in defiance of law, to fake them, must surely be a temptation.
It must surely be a temptation among the Islamist groups in Syria if the Western countries are prepared to mount attacks on Syria on the basis. Well, you interrupt me. You interrupt me at every point. If the Western countries,
that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I absolutely do not. That's a complete fabrication. I have said that the people who would be prepared to fake the attacks would be the Islamist groups. If it is the case that Western countries could be persuaded into it, you've got to check your researcher on that.
I've read the blog myself.
They've given you a bum
If these
steer.
major nations will act in defiance of law, a fake attack, must surely be a temptation. That's what you wrote.
It's a temptation to whom?
The major nations.
No, that's not what it says. Go and read it yourself instead of relying on some researcher.
I did.
You have got it wrong.
I read it myself.
Well, I was
times.
giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Maybe you should write more clearly next time.
I've given you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay,
You've got it wrong.
I got it wrong.
Not say that.
Perhaps because your English isn't very clear.
Well,
Peter
perhaps.
Hitchens,
I don't think that's a characteristic I have.
It's late. Govey and Andrew Lloyd Webber late. Yes, our Environment Secretary, St Michael of the Blessed Plastic Beaker, is back in action, meddling in the minutiae of our lives while saving all creatures great and small, even if it means taking on Andrew Lloyd Webber and his cats. The composer, put that in quotes, apparently uses cat collars which emit mild electric shocks to keep his little darlings from straying from his Hampshire pile and onto a busy road. The Gopher thinks this is too cruel for cats and wants to forbid it, but he hasn't ruled out their use for keeping his cabinet colleagues in line for his particular vision of Brexit. I'm also sure that St Michael has realised how difficult it is to find the Lloyd Webber residence, and that a buzzing sound and the lingering smell of burnt fur is a sure sign you're close. Someone who's here, and of her own free will and without the need for any electrical restraint, is the DJ and TV presenter Ashley James, who's putting morality in the spotlight. And if, after a couple of weeks away from us, you're gagging to send your witterings and your wafflings on the Twitter, the Facebook, or Snapnumpty, oh, don't hold back with your predictable manky missives. But be aware, I'm going all Elon or Elon Musk. If the Tesla boss finds himself in what he deems to be a bad meeting, he just walks out. Henceforth, that will be my approach to social media. Now, news comes ever thick and fast these days, and nothing is more certain than a 24-hour news cycle that changes everything, or until Donald Trump wakes up, switches on Fox and Friends, and starts tweeting. There's a widespread perception in America, I've just returned from there, that Fox News is the broadcasting arm of the Trump administration. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The Trump administration is the governing arm of Fox News, through which the broadcaster now runs the country. Back here in Blighty, just as you think the Maybot might actually be getting the hang of this governing business, the circuits blow and the limbs fall off. After Dear Jez's uncertain response to the nerve agent attack in Salisbury and Labour...
Unfortunately.
Well, that's...
No, well,
that's
the
argument was about the handover of the heavy weapons.
Just to get where you're coming from. You said you don't want to speculate, you don't know.
I don't.
But you've speculated that Western countries can fake such attacks.
I haven't said anything of the kind.
Yes, you did. You said, speaking of Britain, in your blog, speaking of Britain, France and America, you could say there might be a temptation to fake such attacks. If these major nations, talking about us, America and France, will act in defiance of law, this, to fake them, must surely be a temptation.
It must surely be a temptation among the Islamist groups in Syria if the Western countries are prepared to mount attacks on Syria on the basis. Well, you interrupt me. You interrupt me at every point. If the Western countries,
that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I absolutely do not. That's a complete fabrication. I have said that the people who would be prepared to fake the attacks would be the Islamist groups. If it is the case that Western countries could be persuaded into it, you've got to check your researcher on that.
I've read the blog myself.
They've given you a bum
If these major nations will act in defiance of law, this, a fake attack, must surely be a temptation. That's what you wrote.
It's a temptation to whom?
The major nations.
No, that's not what it says. Go and read it yourself instead of relying on some researcher.
I did.
You have got it wrong.
I read it myself.
Well, I
times.
was giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Maybe you should write more clearly next time.
I've given you the benefit of the doubt.
Okay,
You've got it wrong.
I got it wrong.
Not say that.
Perhaps because your English isn't very clear.
Well, perhaps. I don't think that's a characteristic I have.
It's late. Govey and Andrew Lloyd Webber late. Yes, our Environment Secretary, St Michael of the Blessed Plastic Beaker, is back in action, meddling in the minutiae of our lives while saving all creatures great and small, even if it means taking on Andrew Lloyd Webber and his cats. The composer, put that in quotes, apparently uses cat collars which emit mild electric shocks to keep his little darlings from straying from his Hampshire pile and onto a busy road. The ghoster thinks this is too cruel for cats and wants to forbid it, but he hasn't ruled out their use for keeping his cabinet colleagues in line for his particular vision of Brexit. I'm also sure that St Michael has realised how difficult it is to find the Lloyd Webber residence, and that a buzzing sound and the lingering smell of burnt fur is a sure sign you're close. Someone who's here, and of her own free will and without the need for any electrical restraint, is the DJ and TV presenter Ashley James, who's putting morality in the spotlight. And if, after a couple of weeks away from us, you're gagging to send your witterings and your wafflings on the Twitter, the Fakebook, or Snap Numpty, oh, don't hold back with your predictable, manky missives. But be aware, I'm going all Elon or Elon Musk. If the Tesla boss finds himself in what he deems to be a bad meeting, he just walks out. Henceforth, that will be my approach to social media. Now, news comes ever thick and fast these days, and nothing is more certain than a 24-hour news cycle that changes everything, or until Donald Trump wakes up, switches on Fox and Friends, and starts tweeting. There's a widespread perception in America, I've just returned from there, that Fox News is the broadcasting arm of the Trump administration. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The Trump administration is the governing arm of Fox News, through which the broadcaster now runs the country. Back here in Blighty, just as you think the Maybot might actually be getting the hang of this governing business, the circuits blow and the limbs fall off. After Dear Jez's uncertain response to the nerve agent attack in Salisbury and Labour's unremitting and unresolved problems with anti-Semitism, it looked like the Tories were starting to edge ahead in the polls. Then came the scandal of the Windrush generation, an issue simmering on the back burner for too long, but which suddenly flared into the limelight, humiliating ministers, shaming the nation, and leaving folks wondering that perhaps robots aren't really human after all. Here's Richard Medley with his roundup of the week.
this week saw the government's and the opposition's dirty laundry aired in public. Well, I've got a few loads to shift myself, and Michael's gone off on holiday and left a fair bit for me to tackle as well. Thanks a lot, Michael. Still, at least it's a gorgeous day for it. Ah, how did these get in here? Michael must have forgotten to take them with him on holiday. Well, the government had more than a few tricky stains to get out over the Windrush generation of migrants. Promised the right to stay here in the UK, but unable to prove it once the Home Office had destroyed the relevant papers. Home Office Minister Caroline Nokes lathered up just a little bit too soon, admitting to government mistakes before the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary had a chance to.
We have made some mistakes, which we cannot continue to make, and I'm determined that we won't, because these people have contributed an enormous amount.
But the Home Secretary and the PM were eventually forced to apologise for the government's less than squeaky clean handling of the children of Windrush.
I am concerned that the Home Office has become too concerned with policy and strategy and sometimes lose sight of the individual.
I want to apologise to you today because we are genuinely sorry for any anxiety that has been caused.
Directly confronting the Prime Minister, Corbyn accused May of being personally responsible for this stain on her government's reputation.
Yesterday we learnt that in 2010 the Home Office destroyed landing cards for a generation of Commonwealth citizens, and so have told people we can't find you in our system. Did the Prime Minister, the then Home Secretary, sign off that decision?
But Mrs May wouldn't let Corbyn washboard her.
No, the decision to destroy the landing cards was taken in 2009 under a Labour government.
But there are those who are saying that Mrs May's reputation over Windrush is not quite as squeaky clean as she'd like us to believe.
I think it was not just a question of the Home Secretary being told it was a challenging policy. The Prime Minister was as well, and this was a very contested piece of legislation across government departments. And there were some who saw it, I shan't name them, as almost reminiscent of Nazi Germany and the way it's working.
There's nothing better, I always think, than a nice, clean, pressed pair of white Y-fronts. Ah, actually, Teresa, I think these are more your colour, aren't they?
I'll polish the leaves, make them green again, shake out the trees, change the scene again, spring cleaning, getting ready for love.
After that chemical weapons attack in Syria, Britain joined France and America in launching missile attacks on Assad's chemical weapons facilities. And Theresa May delivered an extremely robust defence of that.
I'm absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that it is Parliament's responsibility to hold me to account for such decisions, and Parliament will do so. But it is my responsibility as Prime Minister to make these decisions, and I will make them.
Well, there was no fabric softener from Jeremy Corbyn. He pushed to make it harder for a government to take military action without the support of the Commons.
This statement serves as a reminder that the Prime Minister is accountable to this Parliament, not to the whims of the US President. We clearly need a War Powers Act in this country to transform a now broken convention into a legal obligation.
Turning up his nose at the smell of Corbyn's anti-war detergent was Jez's own backbencher, Chris Leslie.
Those who would turn a blind eye, who would do nothing in pursuit of some moral high ground, should also be held accountable for once today as well.
But refusing to scrub to the PM's rhythm, veteran Commons agitator Ken Clarke questioned the PM's decision to act without Commons approval.
She says there was a problem of time, but surely, once President Trump had announced to the world what he was proposing, a widespread debate was taking place everywhere, including many MPs in the media, but no debate in Parliament.
Hoping it'll all come out in the wash, Call Me Dave may have a few regrets, but surprisingly, calling the referendum on Brexit isn't one of them.
I don't regret holding a referendum. I think it was the right thing to do.
Well, he may not regret it, but many do. And ringing the Remona sentiment for all it's worth are 4 MPs from across the political spectrum who've got together to push for a campaign for the people's vote. Hope I haven't stretched this one too thin. Pegging their hopes on what they carefully avoided calling a second referendum, the 4 called for the public to have a vote on the final terms of the Brexit deal.
I think the best and the right thing to do is to now put it back to the people and say, you now vote on this deal on behalf of 65 million people who have a right to a people's vote.
And if the government had any hopes of an easy parliamentary ride on Brexit, well, they were pretty much mangled yesterday by a defeat in the Lords on the customs union.
That there are times in one's political career where what is alleged to be party loyalty comes way behind trying to stand up for the national interest. I intend to do that on this amendment. I intend to do it elsewhere during the report stage of this bill.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's dirty laundry certainly overflowed from his wash basket this week, didn't it? With that parliamentary debate on anti-Semitism. Well, hoping to encourage their party to clean its act up were Jewish MPs Luciana Berger and Ruth Smeeth.
One anti-Semitic member of the Labour Party is one member too many.
Yeah.
Within the Labour Party, anti-Semitism is now more commonplace, it is more conspicuous and it is more corrosive.
I've been the target of a campaign of abuse, attempted bullying and intimidation from people who would dare to tell me that people like me have no place in the party I have been a member of for over 20 years.
Ah, a lovely, clean pile of laundry. Oh, but what's this? A stubborn stain. I'm going to need something more caustic to get this out. Ah, this should do the trick.
A beautiful launderette, Richard Madeley there. Priti Patel, this mess over the Windrush generation, are the origins not a direct consequence of Mrs May at the Home Office determined to create what she called a hostile environment for migrants?
Well, actually, I don't think they are. And I think this is a really awful situation that has come about. And I think, you know, the Home Office have got to get on top of this and do the right thing now, I think.
But the Home Office have caused
that
it.
are involved. Of course they've caused it, but I think it's
wrong. But have they not caused it? Civil servants reflect the political direction that the politicians want them to go in. And she did want to create a hostile environment for illegal migrants and didn't see the consequences of what this would lead to with the Windrush generation, which had come here before they needed the paperwork.
Well, I think the point is,
isn't that right?
Her focus was illegal immigration. There's no doubt about that. I don't know whether or not this is an unintended consequence, and I hope it isn't.
Well, what other cause could there be?
Well, I have no idea, Andrew. I don't know the ins and outs of what happened in the Home Office back then.
Well, shouldn't we know that now, given what has happened
we will.
to the
I
Windrush
do
generation?
think we will find out. I've heard today that obviously there's more to come. There's greater scrutiny if the Home Office come in next week in Parliament, and rightly so. I think it's right that the public demand questions and get questions.
We've heard testimony from people who were in government at the time as to how there was pressure on all departments to make sure that people couldn't access services, welfare, rental agreements and so on, unless they had the proper documentation. That came from the top down.
And there were changes, if you remember, there was an Immigration Act that came through, I think around 2015 too.
And the Windrush generation got caught up.
But that was focused on illegal immigration. So I don't
know how
They
got classified as illegal, some of them, as a result of this. So it did come out of that.
Well, it could have come out of that policy situation. I just don't know. And these are the questions that I think the Home Office will have to answer. The Home Secretary will be going to the Select Committee next week, the Home Affairs Select Committee, and she will no doubt have to answer the background to all these questions.
Is there no mechanism in government in which, when you get yourself into a position that you are putting in a detention centre some 61, 62-year-old person who's been here all their adult life, is there no mechanism which you say, prior to deportation?
How did they get here?
What are we doing here?
Yeah, how did they get there? Of course, there has to be some mechanism.
But there wasn't.
Well, that is, look, this is for the Home Office to answer all these questions. None of us, I think, here, I don't know, Alan, if you know, you've obviously spent some time in the Home Office, know the ins and outs in terms of even getting to that journey into the detention centre.
That's a good question, Alan. The decision to scrap the landing cards that the Windrush generation originally came with to this country, it was taken in 2009 when you were Home Secretary. Did you know about that?
No, and it was an administrative decision taken by UK Border Agency. And so they should. It wasn't just the Windrush landing card, it was these massive paperwork that built up over 50 years. And you have to remember also, we were introducing a biometric identity card compulsory for anyone coming in from outside the European Union. So we wouldn't have needed, the Windrush weren't involved in any of that. There was no threat to the Windrush generation. And just so it's an administrative decision, just as it was a year later when Theresa May was Home Secretary as my successor.
It was carried out.
And they were destroyed. They were carried out. That's when they were actually
So the decision was taken, but the destruction didn't happen
until another year. And that's where Jeremy was misled, because the previous evening, as I understand it, from reporters, there was, Number 10 were briefing that this happened in 2010. What she had up her sleeve, whether it was deliberate or whatever, all's fair in love and Prime Minister's questions, was that the decision was taken under us. But no, we weren't in any way. In fact, I reached a decision as Health Secretary and Home Secretary when we were looking at this, that no one should be denied medical, because we're all worried about illegal immigration, incidentally.
You know, have you used the phrase hostile environment?
No, I don't. Ian Martin said it on Question Time.
Ian Dale, I think it was.
Ian Dale, was it?
Have you?
I can't remember every word I uttered
I know.
as Home Secretary. But saying there's going to be a hostile environment for people who come here illegally actually is not a terrible thing. Saying you're going to make it, you're actually going to include in that hostile environment people who came over here and were given British nationality and have been living here for years, withdrawing their medical care, losing their jobs, losing their driving licence is horrendous.
Absolutely, it's completely
wrong. And it did come, not just Theresa May, Nick Timothy's got a role in this, because I know, because she was my successor, you pick up what's happening. They went in, we're going to get net migration down to the tens of thousands, an impossible pipe dream, and they cracked down very hard. So, for instance, I know as a constituency MP, you might have had this, Pretty, people who were interpreters for the British Army in Afghanistan, where you never had a problem before. As soon as you made that clear, that was it. But no, that was no longer a hard and fast case to get that.
And there were some well-documented cases back then. Interpreters were one, but also don't forget, part of this clamping down was obviously bogus colleges and things of that nature as well. So I think the point is the focus was rightly on illegal immigration.
But the Windrush people got caught up in the wash.
Well, of course.
Of doing this.
Well, somehow they have now.
And nobody seemed to be able to step in and say, hold on, this isn't for, this is not for them.
But is it just the Windrush generation?
Until the media gave it publicity.
I wouldn't call, I mean, Amber Rudd, I think, you know, she's in a difficult job, and I certainly wouldn't call for her head, but I think she was wrong to suggest to blame officials, because, you know, what you do as a cabinet minister, whatever party you're from, is you take the knock. And in actual fact, I would be very, very, you know, from my experience in the Home Office, very surprised if that wasn't driven from the top, with the special advisors and the rest bearing down on Home Office officials. Look, we've got to get these figures.
Because of the numbers.
Because of the numbers.
Let me move on to the Customs Union. The House of Lords has voted that Britain should stay in the Customs Union even as it leaves the European Union. The stories in the papers tomorrow will show that the European Union has thrown the government's proposals for what the customs arrangement should be back in their face, that they don't want anything to do with them. You could lose on this, couldn't you? There may not be a majority for a customs union in the House of Commons.
So look, I think it's tricky, but I think, to be fair, in the House of Lords, we knew this would not be an easy ride at all. I think, you know, this was always on the table in terms of the customs union. I think the reality is, you know, the Lords are right to have the scrutiny of the bill, have the debates that they are having. But I do think now, and I haven't seen the reports in tomorrow's papers, but I do think the government will, you know, it's got to come back to the House of Commons. We're going to have to debate all the amendments and have the discussions all over again. But the government will have to come up, obviously, with the right kind of measures that obviously will look to address the questions, the wider questions around customs, delivery.
Sure. But it has. It's made these proposals to the European Union, and Mr Barnier says none of them is workable. Now, it's a negotiation. That may change. But my question is, if the Lords has voted that way, that's the attitude of the EU, I'm not sure there is a majority in the Commons for a customs union.
I think...
for coming out of the union.
Customs union. Look, I think this has got to come back to the House, and obviously we will have the discussion at the time. But I think in terms of what Barnier is saying as well, that is something for the Brexit team and obviously the Prime Minister as part of the negotiations.
Could you contemplate a Brexit and still stay in the customs union?
No, I don't think we can have a hokey-cokey option where we've got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I think, you know, the Prime Minister has been pretty clear from day one, and I know it's been a challenging year on Brexit, full stop, that she's, you know, she wants to deliver on the vote that the British public voted for in the referendum. So to be authentic and stay true to that, we're going to have to find the right arrangements on the customs question.
This becomes quite a big issue now, I would suggest.
Yes.
Because it's not clear that there's a majority in the Commons for the government's policy on the customs union.
No, I think they're going to get defeated in the Commons, and I think they're going to get defeated for good reason. You know, all the debate, me and Priti were on different sides in the debate, but what most people said who wanted to come out, sane, rational people, you know, they said, look, fine going in the common market, but it's changed. The common market was the customs union. The single market came afterwards. The common market was the customs union. If they were satisfied with anything, they were satisfied with that. And there were no intricate debates about the customs union. Of course, why should... But for the government to just give that up, they should be hanging on to that and say, look, we're coming out of the European Union, but this is about our economic future.
Well, let's see. It's going to be a big vote in the Commons, I think.
Well, it's going to come back in a big way to the House of Commons, all this.
Now, G.K. Chesterton said that art, like morality, consists of drawing the line somewhere. And I'm sure it was these wise words which inspired the producers of Love Island to draw a new moral line of their own when they vowed to crack down on on-screen hanky-panky, which rather defeats the main reason for watching the show and should ensure the next series is a ratings flop. But I'll still be tuning in to hear the contestants debate the relative merits of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. Yes, whether a sweaty minor celebrity in a sun-soaked beach or a sweaty politician deciding the merits of military action in the bunker, moral lines are all the rage these days. That's why we're putting morality in the spotlight. The world of politics is a murky place at the best of times, so is it difficult to tell which way its moral compass is pointing? Across the Atlantic, it appears to be spinning wildly. So much so, the former director of the FBI, James Comey, had this to say about Donald Trump.
I don't think he's medically unfit to be president. I think he's morally unfit to be president.
Unhappy with Theresa May's decision to take part in airstrikes against President Assad, Stop the War campaigners were keen to exercise their moral judgment.
Theresa May, dare I say!
More used to the high ground than most, #1 diver Tom Daley made a splash when he questioned the morality of some Commonwealth countries that still criminalise homosexuality.
We need to make sure that we try and get as many countries or as many nations within the Commonwealth to, you know, decriminalise LGBT people.
Meanwhile, actor Patrick Stewart thinks Brexit is a moral issue and urged Britain to boldly go where we've already been before.
Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek and Charles Xavier from X-Men were excellent, admirable individuals. They would have voted Remain.
Perhaps we should look to reality TV for some moral guidance. The producers of Love Island have announced the next series will clean up its act. DJ and TV presenter Ashley James thinks we're in danger of losing our sense of right and wrong. Is there anyone out there who can help? And Ashley joins us now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
Have we lost a moral compass?
Do you know what? It's such an interesting question, and I guess you have to kind of decide what is morality, because if you look at it from a religious point of view, I'd say we're not really a religious country. And even when you look at religion, I'd say that a lot of people would see it as quite outdated, some of the values, especially with the Catholic Church. And so, yeah, it's kind of like an interesting topic of debate, I would say. And
but when we were a much more religious country, the sort of Judeo-Christian values did give us a moral compass, and certain rules of behaviour followed from that. What I'm not quite sure now is, given that we are much less of a religious, certainly much less of a Christian country than before, where does the moral compass come from? Who provides it now?
That's the thing. I suppose we have to follow the law, but I think the problem is, and I think one of the great things and negative things of social media are things are a lot more transparent, and I think we are more suspicious of politicians and the police and anyone in authority than we used to be, so we question things a lot more than we would have done in the past, I think. And also laws change so vastly from country to country, or even in the States from state to state. So who do we listen to when it comes to right and wrong, and what is right and wrong? And for example, I was lucky enough during my time on Big Brother to spend time with Anne Widdecombe, who is amazing, but she's a devout Catholic, and some of the things she voted on and her policies could be seen as questionable, especially her views around homosexuality, but she follows the Catholic moral code. So I think, yeah, it's just, I think we need almost like a highway code of morality in a way that we decide.
Who writes that highway code?
Yeah, well, I guess it's another thing like Brexit, isn't it? It's like, do we give it to the public? Because what will we come up with? We are a nation that came up with Boaty McBoatface, so...
It just doesn't augur very well, does it?
Well, do you think there's a role for the family here in terms of values? Because obviously, you know, we all look to others within our peer group, our family as well.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting because I think it comes from the family, but also definitely for younger generations, I'd say rather than the Pope or politicians, we look to celebrities and, you know, who is a role model and what defines a role model, and are celebrities doing enough to be good role models? And even in the...
I mean, would we really want celebrities to be role models?
It's not what we want, though, but I think
I've always thought they've always been doing that.
I think with social media, I read a news article either this week or last week about a girl from Wales who worked in Lidl, and she was actually, her boyfriend was a drug dealer, and the police found her out because she was posting this lavish lifestyle on Instagram. And I think people are wanting to put up more of a luxury pretense now, and so maybe that is, you know, something that...
But the modern cult of celebrity has basically led a lot of people to believe that they can be celebrities even if they have no talent whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, 50 years ago, most famous people had some talent.
Well,
so it's easier to be a celebrity now.
It's much easier to be a celebrity.
Andy Warhol did predict this. He said everyone will be famous for 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
It's going to get in a bit like that. But I think Ashley's analysis was absolutely right about transparency and a lack of deference. They're the two things, and I think it's quite healthy that that deference has gone. You know, people like Andrew interviewing someone in the 50s, a politician, you know, he'd be sort of apologising for troubling them and all that. That's great.
Really?
But I actually,
it's true.
I actually think, yeah, that's the way.
Oh, no, there's a famous interview. I don't know what the interview was. He says to Harold Macmillan, so tell me, Prime Minister, what's your message to the nation tonight? That's a difference. But that's not
now.
Have politicians been, have they provided moral leadership?
I think in the main they try to. I mean, my view about this is we've become a more Christian country in the way we treat minorities, etc., than we were when we were Christian. Yeah. So as fewer people go to church. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you look at the war hero who was chemically castrated by the state for being homosexual in the early 50s, the cards in shop windows were to let no Irish, no dogs, no blacks. And that's I grew up in that.
So maybe without even though it's hard to see what our moral compass is. Maybe, because a lot of people think, oh, we're more immoral now than we're... Maybe we're not. Maybe in a lot of these issues,
well, I think
we have more moral standards.
I think different times have different issues, and I think there definitely are still... We have a long way to go, but I do think in terms of reality TV, like Love Island, trying to ban sexual content more. I think that's a step in the right direction, because then people who do look up to these programmes and aspire to be on these programmes, they don't feel that they need to be as immoral in a way.
But then that's also about boundaries, isn't it? And, you know, with young people in particular.
We've reached our boundary, which is called our cut-off point. Ashley, what are you up to these days?
Well, I've just come from a DJ gig, and so I've got a lot of DJ gigs coming up. Just did Gordon Ramsay's new restaurant launch.
Oh, very well.
Second job of the night.
Well, we'll get an invitation next time.
Yeah, definitely. Are you going to come?
Thank you. Now, that's your lot for tonight, folks, but not for us. We're off to Lulu's, where it's a Star Trek themed night featuring actor Patrick Stewart, who, as we know, says his character, Jean-Luc Picard, would have voted to remain in the EU referendum, which is a pretty remarkable political insight, given that he's French, he's non-resident in the UK, and he won't be born for another 300 years. But enough nitpicking. We can't wait to find out what Spock thinks about quantitative easing, Dr. McCoy's ideas for reducing NHS waiting lists, and Scotty's solution to Scotland's systemic fiscal deficit. On second thoughts, just beam me up to the Blue Nun Bar. Nighty-night, don't let the first Saudi cinema goers in 35 years bite.